Live from Charlotte, it's the FinTech Dating Game. Here's your host, Aubrey Hawes. All right, well, welcome to the FinTech Dating Game. So we've had so much fun in some of these FinTech events trying to cast and get information out there in a panel format that is a little bit more non-traditional. So what we thought we would do is take the dating game show and apply it to FinTech to make it a little more interesting. So I'm your host, and what we're going to do is we're going to bring a contestant on stage in here in a minute who's going to represent two different banks, a mega large national bank, and then I would say kind of a little bit smaller than a super regional, say a $50 to $80 billion bank. And he's going to be looking for three suitors who can actually help him modernize. He's trying to figure out how he's going to modernize. So with that, let's go meet our eligible partners. Come on, come on. We're trying to make this fun. So our first eligible partner we've got up here is Ryan Battles from EY. He's the tech delivery leader and the Nexus platform owner for EY. Thank you for being here. Next, we have Mark Moroz from Live Oak. He's the EVP and head of operations and payments. Thank you for being here from Wilmington, North Carolina. And last, we actually have Sanghosh Bhalla from Cognizant, who's responsible for digital banking and core banking at Cognizant from a management practice. Thank you guys for being here. And I should also say, after this at the reception, most of this group will be here to go back and take your own questions that you may have around transformation. So off stage, we've had our contestant, Jonathan Kolozsvary from M&T, who's been so welcoming to go back and assume this role. And just so banks will take my call the next time I call them to ask them to do this, Jonathan is from M&T. He is not representing M&T on this stage right now. He's really gonna assume this sort of fictitious role that we've got him in. But just so if you want to know what he really does do, he is an SVP at M&T. He's responsible for the director of new ventures. He's actually here and co-founder of GrowGrade. They actually have a booth out there. He would very much love to talk to a lot of you guys post this event. So with that, Jonathan, are you ready to go back and see if we actually have some eligible partners that can actually help you modernize?
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. So just so we don't forget which bank he's representing, the wonderful folks at RevTech Labs created this wonderful sign for us. So we're going to get started with our Fast Forward bank. So why don't you ask your first question there for our eligible partners that we can't see on the other side of the stage.
Terrific. So my first question is for contestant number one. We've been in business the last few decades and successfully grown. We can afford to be a bit more nimble than longer-rooted, tenured banks who have deep infrastructure issues. With what you provide, how would you help ensure that we're able to sustain this transformation you're going to work through with us when your team exits the engagement?
Sure. So I think a common problem we see a lot of the times, I think a lot of our partners like to see us do things with them versus to them. So I think a lot of what we'll bring in terms of methods and ways of working, the intelligence we have in the market, would typically be done in kind of a two-in-the-box model where we can work side by side with you as you're forging new trails on the transformation. We'll typically lead and then bring people along. So as we move on to the next thing, we're always leaving that knowledge and expertise behind, with the lifeline.
Thank you. My next question is for contestant number two. When you think about our value proposition, it's speed to market and offering new capabilities. How would you help in this transformation for us to build, but with our end users in mind?
That's a great question. I think it starts with making sure that you're on the right platform. Today, we live on a platform that from end to end is API and cloud native driven. And so having that flexibility to continue to drive new innovation to our end customers is very important to us. And I think making sure that we continue to partner and drive that innovation with your team, we can continue to make sure that you're blazing the path.
Thank you. My next question is for contestant number 3. Knowing our corporate culture of collaboration and consensus-driven, how does your team work with us and not remain siloed?
Yeah, so I think gone are the days when clients were expecting people, consultants to just come and do stuff and leave. I think what they're expecting now is to actually come and embed themselves into the culture and teach them how to do it. So if you look at legacy transformation, the way we see it is actually a 3-legged transformation, right? So you've got the platform itself, which you're trying to modernize, but you also have what we call the delivery transformation and the workforce transformation to go along. So typically what we do when we go and try to attack a legacy transformation with a bank of your size, we actually try to inculcate a culture of co-developing assets and frameworks and playbooks, because that allows your team to have a skin in the game, right? Now, typically what we do is we take 2 roles. So one is we obviously will do stuff that is supposed to be done in terms of transformation, but we also want to make sure we coach your people as we go along. Because if you look at legacies are usually monoliths, very traditional way of delivering. But the new platforms are very agile, modern, engineering driven, right? So there's a significant shift that's required. And so it adds complexity when you have delivery transformation and workforce transformation going along with that. So our focus is not just doing it, but also making sure we work with your people, identify the change agents, make sure we see the change sustainable, so that you can see that once we leave, right? So.
Thank you.
Interesting, Jonathan, just based, I know you kind of went through and asked each one of those a question. Is there what are your kind of initial sort of reactions to kind of hearing what they have to say? Is there any sort of area you want to probe a little bit deeper, whether it's, what does cloud computing mean, or how is your team at Fast Forward going to go back and kind of, assume, owning this going forward?
Yeah, maybe a question open for any of the contestants, or for all of them, I should say, is, when we think about the experience that our customers look to have, especially with the type of bank that we are, we try to deliver things as consumer experiences would look and feel, similar to Apple and Tesla and otherwise. I guess in this transformation, a lot of this is infrastructure changes, but is there anything you would think of when it comes to making sure that we're continuously delivering on that customer experience side that would be a part of the work you would do with us?
That's a free-for-all, so any one of you guys want to take that one?
I think all 3 of us do.
Okay,
Yeah.
go right ahead. Contestant one, why don't you let us know so we know which contestant's responding?
All right. So I would say a few things. One, with the changes in infrastructure, there's obviously different sets of capability. I think understanding exactly what you want to achieve through transformation is important in deciding where you make those investments on platform. But as others have stated, being in the cloud, being API-driven, being open, having a high degree of discoverability in your data is what allows you to create those very personalized and bespoke experiences for your customers. I think on the other side, having a good marketing technology stack so you understand the journey analytics, you understand where people are dropping off experiences, you're able to experiment on new approaches and kind of test the efficacy in your user base. Those are very important tools now to helping to shape those experiences, since they're much more fluid today than they were in the past.
Yeah, and this is contestant number 2. That was well said. I'll kind of add a little bit onto that. So I kind of put it like in 3 buckets, and the first one would be data, right? Completely understand that customer journey. Make sure you're tagging along the way and understanding where all your drop-off points are, so where your failures are and where your successes are, and continue to go back and change the platform to make sure that you're continually testing and learning and testing and learning and testing and learning. And you'll never hit perfection. If you do, you just became complacent, and you're going to get crushed. And so I would continue to do that test and learn and read your data. Actually, one of the buckets was don't be complacent, so I already took that one up. And then probably the third point is don't be afraid to get your own teams involved, right? Make sure that they understand their journey. Make sure that your mobile team's talking to your online team, so you're channel agnostic. So your customer experience is truly end-to-end, no matter whether they be in the branch, no matter whether they be online, or no matter whether they be in mobile. Make sure that transformation goes through all of your channels and not just pinpointed to digital.
Yeah, so I essentially see 4 themes that I think are critical to that success. I'll start with So if I see most of the banks, their current operating structures essentially spans across products, geographies, customer segments. And that in some cases can be problematic because it leads to, if you will, right, departmental silos and overlapping responsibilities and unclear ownership. So when we engage with clients, we typically recommend that you develop what we call a digital operating model, which is essentially centered around the customer experience journeys. So start seeing as a bank, your bank as a collection of journeys, if you will. What that allows you to do is essentially then line up your capabilities, whether it's biz, tech, ops, around those journeys, and it creates what I call a singularity mindset. Yeah. The second thing is, creating a blueprint, if you will, is actually a collaborative exercise. When it comes to legacy transformation, very often it's left to technology to do the heavy lifting, which is not fair because it's everyone's business, right? So it's very important for everyone to get involved, develop it, and have a common understanding of what the target state business capabilities and architecture looks like. If you don't have that, you're not going anywhere. And the third is try to modernize progressively, right? So take one journey at a time. Try to modernize it in a way that you are gradually developing capabilities. If you try to do it at one time, it becomes very overwhelming. And last but not the least is, I think some of you guys already mentioned, use open banking architecture, right? So the idea is API first, cloud native microservices, that allows you not only to develop APIs, but you can actually monetize it because it allows you to create a lot of vibrant marketplace. And the beauty of that is it allows you to rapidly deploy and integrate a lot of the content and services and products that you need to the market. So, yeah.
Wow. So, Jonathan, those are some. That was. I think our second round of questions kind of that our eligible partners really got their creative juices flowing to really look at saying how could fast forward bank really going. Anything else you want to ask these guys before we have you assume your alter ego?
The decision would be tough, but I think all three did a great job answering the questions. So no, I'm all set.
You're all set? Is there a partner that you think, and this is really not just for you, but is there a partner that you would see out of those three for anyone that we think is really the right partner here for our fast follower based on our responses?
I'd leave it to the audience to decide.
Anyone? All right, okay, I won't put you guys on the spot. I don't have a mic. I won't ask Michael to come out here and go find one. All right, so listen. So now what we're going to do is I'm not going to bring up another contestant on stage because Jonathan's going to be our mega national bank. He's representing a big, huge money center bank. And we really want to kind of go through the same dating game experience. And if you just kind of help follow along while we're doing this is because when I'm a mid-sized bank, it may not be the exact same approach to how do I go back and transform myself as it is for a much larger bank that has maybe many more decades or a century or more in business. So with that, let's go back and we're going to go through the dating game again, Jonathan, with a set of questions. And again, for our eligible partners here, we're now talking to our mega bank, so you guys can go back and answer if your position changes based on advising sort of a mega national bank. So with that, Jonathan.
Thank you. So the first question is for contestant number 3. We've been around for 200 plus years and are concerned about migrating off of these systems that have carried us thus far. How will you mitigate risk in our transition to this new infrastructure?
Yeah, so typically when you look at a bank which is large in size, right, there is a lot of upfront deliberation that's required before you even embark on the journey. And I broadly classify those considerations into 4, right? So business, strategic, technology, and finance. And there are a set of questions and dimensions, if you will, that actually leads you to understand, what will that roadmap look like in terms of the business case? What benefits are you trying to drive? What markets are you trying to go after? What customer segments are you trying to go after? In any large bank, I think what quickly we have seen when most of the legacies, if you will, right, are mainframe monoliths. They're complex implementations which are intertwined with the channels and the supporting systems. And that does create a lot of issues because that itself causes a lot of cost issues and outdated technology architecture, but you also have an aging workforce. And when you're trying to modernize, you're trying to modernize not just the platform, but everything around that. So typically what we do, we try to spend a lot of time upfront trying to understand, what are we trying to modernize because it's not just about the platform, it's the ecosystem around that. And our recommendation is take advantage of not just the platform itself, but also looking at the surrounding ecosystems and the channels to do it. For large banks, typically what we see and what works best is progressive modernization, right? The bank of your size would typically have a budget of $100 to $200 million. And it's very hard to go and acquire that kind of budget. So we always recommend that slice it down and go after the journeys that you think will make more sense and do progressive modernization, right? So the reason we recommend progressive modernization is that it allows you to gradually hollow out the mainframe or the monolith over a period of time, right? And that allows you to dial up and dial down based on your cost and risk profile. What also makes it complicated for a large bank is that you're talking about different geographies and different markets, which have their own regulatory pressures and focus areas, right? So the idea is to do progressive modernization, do it gradually over time, pick a journey or a use case, prove it, and then you gradually do it over the time. So that's typically how we recommend. Any transformation journey would take anywhere from 2 to 3 to 5 years. And it's very important that you do it over time so that when you show value to the business, everyone feels encouraged to continue the journey. You don't want to do all at one time and then start dropping the balls, because at that point of time, everyone starts losing interest, right? And that's what nobody wants. So.
Wow, so I would tell you that, it sounded like with contestant number 3, you go on a date and you're going to be in a committed relationship as long as you have enough budget to keep that relationship going. Maybe, I know that's an oversimplification of what I heard, but that sounds right. But it sounds like you need to show up with some bags of money, and it's going to take you a while to get there, Jonathan.
Probably a great transition or segue into my next question, which is for contestant number 2. A major issue for us is convincing our organization that an investment and overhaul like this is worth it. Can you share how you'd help that executive stakeholder management?
Yeah, so there's change management across the board that needs to be considered in any type of project like this, especially of this magnitude. And so going in and actually almost building a POC and showing the proof points of where you believe that this new journey can start is a big deal, right? And then comparing cost. Go back through the cost analysis. So the upfront investment should pay off in the long run, or maybe it is not the right choice, or they're not the correct platform for you to move to. But you also have to make sure that everyone, especially from leadership down, is on board with this and involved in this whole process, because it is a change in the bank that's been running for 200 plus years and probably on code that's been out there for 40 plus years, right? And so, don't be afraid to spin up almost a whole nother journey for a subset of customers, new entrants into the bank. Have them start that journey, start to refine that journey, configure it, add new players into that platform to start picking off products from your old platform. And then think about the migration. Some folks will migrate naturally over to the new platform because that's what they've been yearning for a very long time, especially after the pandemic, to go more of a self-service digital model than a walk into the branch model. And also make sure that you are armed with all of the data from other banks that may have gone through this transition or are going through this transition, and come in there with some really true hard facts to make sure that what you're talking about there is the right thing for the bank.
Well, that sounds like it sounded like I heard some experience on both of the contestant number 2 and contestant number 3 around, one is it may cost you a while, it's multiple journeys, or maybe go back and start with something new to go back and target those new sort of customers you want to go after. Where else do you want to go with this, Jonathan?
I do have one other question, and it's for contestant number 1. When you think about tech debt that we've accrued over the tenure and legacy systems we've had, what does migration actually look like? Especially when we think about the costs, the investment it's going to take. Is this a simple switchover, or does this take time?
I think it definitely takes time. I mean, one of the things we typically do when we start a broader transformation, especially as you migrate to more of a platform strategy, is to rationalize the applications that you have today. I think before you think about moving things, you should really think about what you actually need in the future state and what is worthwhile to move onto the platform. So much like hollowing the core is a good way to kind of earn your way through progressive modernization, I think the initial rationalization just helps to make that problem much smaller. And then I think this is when it becomes much more of a business decision versus technology, but understanding the trade-offs in taking out IT debt you have today versus addressing the market you're going to have tomorrow. It tends to be a balance of art and science in terms of what is addressed when. But over time, that should be part of your transformation plan. And then more importantly, as you are looking at your intake or governance process around the work that you undertake, make sure you have a plan to avoid adding new IT debt. And if you do, there's a good reason to do it.
So it sounds like there's some radical prioritization we're going to have to do regardless.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think you got three really different, I think, good approaches for you and your board to go back and consider around how you want to do that. Any of those other sort of topics you want to kind of dig back into a little bit?
Yeah, maybe one last one. So we have this major competitor right now. It's called Fast Forward Bank. They're allowed to move a little bit quicker than we are, simply because of size and our legacy of systems. When you think about FinTech, and you think about us maybe even cannibalizing our own processes, our own ways of working, our own systems themselves, what advice would you have to us to compete with those early stage, more nimble banks that are trying to eat our lunch?
So I may push that one. I may help you out, Jonathan, and maybe have our contestant number 2.
Yeah.
Answer that one first.
Yeah.
And then we'll have the other guys. I'm sure contestant number 2 is okay with that.
Yeah, I'm definitely fine with that because I think it's the same plays I just spoke about, right? So build that almost neobank to the side and allow that to compete with the smaller, more nimble banks, right? Because that's eventually where you want to get to. These platforms are built in a day and age where they're Lego blocks, right? Pieces of the puzzle should be able to be snapped and unsnapped back in. This way, you're always going back to testing and learning. As you're testing and learning, you're able to either modify the platform in one direction or another pretty quickly. This will allow you to be just as nimble as those banks and start to acquire more customers in that are probably going to last a little bit longer. Now, look, you are going to have to create almost a wall between your current customer base and your new customer base. You can't treat them both the same, right? If you're going to spend more money on technology to deliver a better customer experience in the end run, you don't want those people going in the branch and eating up more OpEx from you, right? And so you have to make sure that you do it and be able to walk the line. There's been a few banks out there, mega banks out there, that have tried this strategy and have failed miserably. It's because they didn't have the mentality of it's okay sometimes to treat customers in a different fashion based upon the platforms that they're either living on or they want to live on, right? And so you have to make sure that you're okay with that in the beginning.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think if you look at, eventually when you develop a target state blueprint, right, and we, most of us will agree that it needs to be modular and it needs to be component driven and open API driven and all of that stuff. You come to a point where you have to make a decision of what capabilities you need to build and buy, right? And I think banks should now, given that there is such a rich ecosystem of fintechs available across the value chain, whether you look at CRMs or core banking or KYC or AML, you name it, right? It's amazing that there's so much innovation going on around these niche areas. I think what banks should do is try to avoid building capabilities in-house and leverage the fintech ecosystem as much as they can. That allows them the nimbleness and the agility we were talking about, but then it also allows you to leverage them using innovative pricing models like pay-as-you-go, for example, right? And then allows you to free up a lot of capital that you would typically spend on developing this. When you're looking for a partner, make sure that whoever you're bringing in to help you stitch together that integration architecture, if you will, make sure they understand this landscape, right? So they should be able to convince you that they understand the fintech space, who are the players on that. They understand the strengths and weaknesses that these fintech players bring to the market, and then what will be the implication on your business if they bring certain solutions into it. What's also more important is you're not just picking up a fintech for the sake of it. It's very also important to understand that the fintech is making significant investments in developing it constantly, right? So there is a fair amount of roadmap being developed. They treat that as a flagship product. And then a mindset around partnership, right? So that becomes important. So if you can develop that ecosystem of partnerships around the fintechs, I think you can achieve a certain amount of nimbleness and agility you're looking at compared to the neobanks. Now, what that allows you to do, and one of the studies that we have done, shows that it allows you to reduce our operating cost significantly by anywhere from 30 to 40%. Now that itself is a savings that you can pass down to end users, whether it's high yield savings account, for example, right, or lower interest rate on the lending products. So that's the benefit you get by leveraging these innovations that are happening in the fintech space, right?
So before contestant number 1 goes, I bet your board would be happy with a 30% operational savings.
Most
as I heard right. I think that would definitely, that definitely sounds like a quite advantageous from partner number 3. So partner number 1, sorry, I know you're going to go back and say something, but I wanted to react to that statement.
Yeah, so agree with all the comments that the others have made. I mean, maybe 2 things I'd add, especially with regard to the larger banks. I think the larger banks tend to approach transformation from the inside out versus the outside in. And I think when you're going after, especially new segments in the market, or looking to deepen relationships in those segments, using primary market research, concept testing with the people that you're intending to attract to the bank, extremely important. I think it's somewhat undervalued in banking. The second I'd say is, I think a lot of time banks obsess over what the fintechs are doing and how they can compete. Whereas, I view this as, look at the things that you can do that a fintech cannot, and then figure out ways to use fintechs to partner and kind of amplify those capabilities. So just, having a DDA account, for instance, especially for a long-lived account, multiple members in a household, you have a wealth of behavioral intelligence that you can use to shape some of these journeys and provide insights and personalization that most fintechs would struggle to do because they don't have access to the data. Finding out what those levers are you have, and then kind of building the partnership models to get the force multiplier is something that I think banks are beginning to find success in, and will definitely help you kind of stay up with the more nimble players.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, contestant number 1. I think you're exactly right. I think it's an interesting sort of perspective around how do you kind of balance that. Anything, Jonathan? Any of those responses help make it easier? Or do you have any other one last sort of follow-up question you want to lob over there? It seems like our eligible partners are really starting to kind of dig in to what it means to really help you transform your mega national bank.
Yeah, no, there was a lot there, especially around what I describe as option theory, right? The outside-in approach versus inside-out, the buy-build partner. I guess maybe the last question I would just have is, we haven't talked about that either, just straight-up purchase, right? Another bank, another fintech that might be able to do this for us. What's your perspective on that? Is that something we should be exploring, and when's the right time to do that?
I didn't get the question.
So this is contestant number 2. I've got a real passion around this one, right? So if you take a look at the legacy platforms that are out there today, I mean, that's where good fintech goes to die, right? I always compare them to kind of that, where all the airplanes are at the end of the LAX runway out in the desert where they're dead, they're not flying anymore. That's what I think of fintech that get bought up as platforms, right? And so I go back to the word complacency, right? So then you become complacent because you buy something, you don't innovate on top of it, you don't do a very good job of integration, right? And then you're right back to where you started from in the first place before you tried to make this so-called transformation. So to me, partnering with fintechs, and the right fintechs, as contestant number 3 said, is definitely very important to consider as you go through this journey. You want to make sure that they are willing to continue to innovate and to challenge their own platforms at times to make sure that they are the best in breed in the market. And if they're not, this is where I go back to the Lego blocks again. You unsnap them, you find somebody who is hungrier, who has newer technology, right, and that you can pass on to your end users. It may be a bad way to look at it or a cynical way to look at it, but it's what's going to keep these platforms moving forward and continue to innovate in the marketplace and not be on 40-year-old legacy global code.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's very important, as I said, is to find a fintech partner who is constantly innovating around their platform, right? The moment a fintech feels that they are in a number 2, number 3 position, complacency might set in. They may have the top 3 or 4 banks as the customer. It's good for them, but what does it mean for you, right? So when they come to your ecosystem, you're bringing the platform as is, obviously, but you also want to make sure that you're co-innovating around it, right? So as I said, make sure that they have a roadmap that's laid out, right? They're constantly innovating. They are putting significant efforts in developing that. What is also important to understand is that there are internal controls and risks that you have to deal with, right, when you're bringing an external partner. So it's very important that they understand that whether they are the appropriate SLAs or controls or risks, that they understand what it takes to deliver that service, right? So one of the things we do when we bring the fintechs into the banks as vendors is to collectively develop what we call a services operating framework, right? Because it's not just one fintech. One fintech is down, you have to understand once service is done, it impacts downstream, right? What's going to happen, right? So it's very important to develop that with them, and constantly innovate, make sure they understand they are operating within an environment, so what they deliver has to be relevant, and make sure that the roadmap is pretty robust so we can continuously focus on that, right? So.
Yeah, I think contestant number 2 is spot on in terms of the complacency. I think what you see a lot of times is someone purchases a fintech because they have a capability that they can't achieve, or a way of working or a way of thinking that they don't have, and the first thing you do is force them into the way you do things today that prevented you from doing that in the first place. So you tend to kind of stifle a lot of the innovation that you would otherwise have had the benefit of. So I think what tends to be a more successful pattern is to have a lab or some way ring fence some of these fintechs so you're not stifling them with the overhead. You still get the benefit of their innovation without introducing that complacency. I think another thing we're seeing a lot of is as part of a bank's modernization strategy, presenting a front to the fintechs. That's something that they are familiar with. So having developer portals, publishing your API catalog, so at least at your endpoints you look and feel like someone they can partner with, and it takes a lot of the friction out of the big bank versus fintech in terms of how they operate.
So that was good. So what I heard was none of those 3 guys have a bank to sell you, which is fine. And maybe that's the view is that's not really the right sort of strategy. Clearly I heard partner, 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 open, 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 modern, innovate. Anything else, Jonathan? Are you ready to let our audience try to make a decision based on that?
I think better with collaboration is the consensus for sure. So yes, with audience away.
All right. Anyone in the audience have a view on that? Who do we think is the best partner here for our mega bank? Do we have an answer? That's okay. We're not going to do that. So one of the things I do want to do was to wrap this up because our goal was to, I know we got happy hour after our session. But if you did not come in the front and the names were not up here on the boards like they've been for everyone else, I thought it's very important for everyone to understand who our 3 eligible bachelors are. Would you like to actually find out now, Jonathan?
Sure.
Who our three eligible bachelors are. So bachelor number 1 is Ryan Battles from EY. So thank you, Ryan, for coming on stage and sharing with us. And he's really responsible for technology delivery, so if you didn't get that at the front of this. Next was Mark Moroz from Live Oak Bank, and he's responsible for their head of operations and payments. So I think that's clearly why we got some of the perspective, Mark, that you brought on board. Thank you. And last but not least was Sanghosh Bhalla from Cognizant, who's really responsible in their management consulting group around digital banking and core modernization. So let's give a big round of applause for our 3 eligible partners. I really was delighted to do that. And last, I want to give Jonathan a call out because you don't know how hard it is to go back and get a bank's PR team to let someone come on stage and represent 2 different fictitious banks and not be assumed that he's representing his own bank. So I just want to make sure that is clear one last time, so when someone views this on YouTube, they realize that, what, M&T what's this? No, this was not an M&T discussion. This was our 2 different fictitious banks. So thank you, Jonathan. But Jonathan, again, does represent M&T and is actually here with his Grow Grade group. I have a booth out there, and I know he very much, that was one plug that he's like, I'm agreeing to do this, but I really would like to have a lot of conversations. And that to me is the best part about having FinTech Gen back in person, is all those one-on-one conversations. So please reach out to everyone up here on stage, and we'd love to meet with you post the event. Thank you.
Thank you.